Alright, today we are talking about Ragnar drums by Solemn Tones. They did give me these drums in exchange for making this video, so I just want to be transparent with that. If that's important for you to know, now you know. If you're short on time, you're not really sure if you want to watch this whole video or not, here's a spoiler alert. This is what we're going to be talking about in the video. One, what is Ragnar drums? It's a lightweight yet formidable drum library that doesn't require contact or contact player to operate in your DAW. 2, who is Ragnar drums for? I'd say that it's for songwriters who need really good sounding drums fast. 3, what does Ragnar drums sound like? Sounds like this. 4, what are some of the standout features of Ragnar drums? An easy way to choose between different levels of processing, a humanized control for those who can't be bothered to manually adjust MIDI velocities, a sample loader for kick and snare one-shots. 5, subjective pros and cons of Ragnar drums from some random dude on the internet. Pros, lightweight yet sounds great. Cons, not quite as in-depth if you need really detailed control and lots of articulations. 6, the overall verdict on Ragnar drums from some random dude on the internet. I think it's great. I highly recommend it for songwriters who want great sounding drums right out of the box without a bunch of, you don't need to tweak on a bunch of shit, but you still have enough flexibility to get your hands dirty if you want. Not so much for super in-depth mixer types who want, super detailed tweakability. At this point, you're probably just wanting to hear what it sounds like, so here are some demos. Alright, there's a quickie demo for that ass. Alright, so full disclaimer, I'm a bit of a slut for drum samples. When I see a new drum library, I usually want it. Even if I don't need it, I just kind of want it. You can't really have too many drum samples in my opinion. So when Solemn Tones hit me up about making a video for this, I'm like, yeah, I will gladly, I hadn't heard it at all, but I was like, drum samples? Yes, let's go with that. And I was pleasantly surprised. We'll get into the details as we go. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. So you may know Solemn Tones. They make like guitar sample libraries also. I don't know if you've heard any of that. Maybe I'll have a clip somewhere. Or you can just look up their website and check the stuff out yourself. They've probably got better demos than I have. I typically use, I call them MIDI guitars, but I use Odin 2 a lot for like drafting and writing. Some people like to write music in Guitar Pro. I can't stand that program. Like it's cool like for reading tabs and like converting MIDI into guitar tab or what have you, but I can't stand writing stuff in that program. My preferred way to write is on a guitar, but MIDI is a good way to get me out of a rut. So when I think of Solemn Tones, I kind of generally think more towards like the creative side of things, more so than like the mixing and finalizing side of things. That's just my opinion as some random dude on the internet. I have heard demos from people making insanely realistic sounding, like full on mixes with MIDI guitars. That's not really my bag. I'm not super into that kind of stuff, but it is massively impressive from like a technical standpoint. I'm more of like approaching MIDI guitars as kind of like a mock-up, or like, you know, you're making like a wireframe model of something that you want to build in real life. And also, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, I'm not really like a keyboard player, more of a guitar player, like a caveman riff kind of guitar player. But having all of the notes just, you know, simply laid out on a keyboard makes me think a little bit more melodically than I might if I'm just chugging away on a guitar. So that's kind of where I come from with MIDI guitars, and that's kind of generally been my experience with Solemn Tones. So while this generally for me, while I'm thinking of this kind of stuff more on like the creative side of things and drafting and making demos and stuff, these are absolutely good enough to use in a final mix if you want. Generally, I prefer a little bit more tweakability because I'm just a nerd. I started recording like real drums back in the day, and then, you know, kind of going down that route, and then like gradually working in MIDI drums into my workflow. I use Superior Drummer 3 a lot, which if you have that, you know that you can get super nerdy with all kinds of details. This is a little bit more simplified, which is fucking awesome in a lot of cases. I actually put this on my laptop, and it's installed on the OS drive on my laptop, so I can just like go around and write, you know, good sounding demos with just MIDI. I've got a little, you know, smaller MIDI keyboard that's USB powered, so I could like sit in a park and like write stuff that sounds pretty fucking cool. And these drums, like I said, they sound good enough. Well, you fucking heard them. They sound good enough to use in a final mix if you don't want to get super tweaky on stuff. So they're pretty cool. So a little bit more detail on what Ragnar drums is. When I say it's lightweight yet formidable, what I mean is it's got a really small footprint. The installation file, at least for this Mac version that I have installed on my system, it was only 2.4 gigabytes. So that's pretty small. If you're used to, you know, drum libraries, you know, they can get pretty big, you know, up to like 20, 30, 40 gigabytes sometimes. And that's kind of what I mean by lightweight. I don't mean that it sounds, you know, it doesn't really feel limited due to that small footprint. Ragnar Drums operates in VST audio units and the Pro Tools, whatever that, AAX or whatever. It's got those different formats, so depending on what system you're on, you can run the Ragnar drums. One of my favorite things about Ragnar drums is that you don't need contact to run it. I'm not trying to knock contact, but I just don't like it very much. So the samples for Ragnar drums were recorded at Sandlane recording facilities with Joost van den Broek. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that name.
I'm Joost van den Broek.
I am severely sorry for that butchering, but he's done work with Epica, Powerwolf, Sabaton, and Blackbriar, so sounds like he did a good job. So the theme here that I'm finding with Ragnar drums is ease of use. A lot of the features here are just set up to like make things easy, which is cool. I'm kind of a nerd, so I'm not really afraid to go deep and tweak things, but if you're in like a songwriting mode, you shouldn't really be messing with any of that stuff. So that's kind of where I'm coming from when I say that these are really great for songwriting and stuff. It's not a bunch of stuff that you don't need. It's just enough to make really good sounding drums, like for a demo, or, you know, if you want to use them on a full mix, it's totally acceptable for that. So like I said before, I would say that Ragnar drums is primarily aimed at people who want results fast. Kind of like the Mac users. I'm a Mac user, but the Mac users of the producer world, like, dude, I just want some fucking drums that sound good now. Like, this is just a preset. I didn't fuck with any of this at all. And later on, we'll go through some sounds. I don't have any extra stuff going on in this mix that you're hearing, or the examples that you've heard. They're all just presets. And I'm not doing any processing afterwards. I'm not using the multi-outs. This is just exactly how these drums sound right out of the box. My main output on this DAW session that we've got here in Studio One, I do have a clipper, but that's just like a safety clipper to protect the screen recording that I'm recording right now. I don't really have anything going on that's changing any sounds or anything. So yeah, if you're like a super in-depth producer and you like to tweak stuff and you want to get like your own sounds going on, you can switch everything to the raw mode and kind of tweak things, move everything to the multi-outs here and then do all of your own processing and get a little bit deeper. But if you really want like a lot of articulations and stuff, you'll see on the MIDI map, there's not a whole lot going like in the form of like, like the more strange articulations like flams or rolls and things like that, or like tom, like rim clicks, stuff like that. You're not really going to find a whole lot of that in this library. If that's important to you, you might want to go with something that has more articulations. But like I said, for people who are primarily focused on songwriting and just they need results right now, this is pretty great. So, all right, so sounds. Rather than demonstrating the absolute pinnacle potential of these drums, I'm going to leave that to other people who are undoubtedly already making videos about this drum library. I'm just sticking to stock presets so that you can actually hear what they sound like when you get them. Kind of what you hear is what you get kind of thing. Quickly, I'm just going to play that same part with some different presets so you can kind of get a feel for, what things sound like out of the box. This is just stereo out going to the main outs along with these other instruments. And there's no other external processing whatsoever. So, like I said, you've got these different modes here. You may have seen when I was going through the presets, this kind of changing. You can switch to the raw samples at any point, which is really cool. If you're kind of younger, you might be like, ugh, why would I want to do that? That's how you get sounds, and that's kind of how you learn how to mix, is by starting with raw stuff and making them sound how you want. You will be a little bit limited by the fact that you don't really have like a snare top and bottom in this, so it's like somewhat pre-mixed a little bit even in the raw stage, or the raw form, but that's kind of where you kind of build your own sound a little bit. I will say that this Doom Doom Kit processed preset here, this will fucking totally work. If you're really into like the modern metal drum sound, you can just get this thing, use that preset for your drums, and then you're probably going to get compliments on your drum mix, because people are going to be like, dude, how'd you get those drum sounds? And you don't have to tell them that you used a preset, but you can just make it easy, you know? A lot of people will be like, oh, that's dumb because you're using a preset. I want to make my own drum preset. And it's like, okay, well, that's just kind of what modern drums typically sound like, is a preset. So if you want it the long way around, you can do a bunch of tweaking and stuff and make them sound like a preset. Or you can just cut out a bunch of the work, use a preset, and you're already there. Save yourself a ton of trouble. As you may have already guessed, you don't have to use just presets. You've got different options on each kit piece here. We've got 5 snares, 5 kicks, 3 tom sets, 18 cymbals, and 1, you've heard it right, there's a cowbell, if you're into that sort of thing. I'm not going to go through all of these because, you know, we don't want this video to be too long, but I'll just quickly go through stuff. I'll just put it on processed mode. There's the Doom kick, birch, whatever. There's that thing. There's that thing. There's that thing. Whenever you've got the full Doom kit on, it goes to this like hellscape GUI thing. That's pretty cool if you're into hell. So that's the Doom snare. We've got a probably a Yote, however you say that brand, a Yoti, whatever, dude. I don't know how to say stuff. Black Beauty, Ludwig or Ludwig, whatever the fuck. And yeah, I'm not using these in a mix, but you already heard them. We got these toms. If you do switch to this kit, you lose a tom, but who cares? It's fine. So there's a quick preview of some of the drum shell tones. Got 3 different hi-hats. An interesting thing here is this kind of like a wild card cymbal position here. You can put whatever you want here. So if you want an extra crash or an extra ride, you can put it here. The only thing is, like, if you want the 2 ride thing, it's still going to be panned to whatever. Like, you can invert, you know, if you want the ride to be on the left, you can invert that via the mixer here. Invert the pan. But as far as I have found in my experimentation, it's going to do that for both rides if you have 2 rides. So again, that's more of like a nitpicky thing. Most other drum libraries don't let you do that either. So it's just, you know, that's just a matter of how things are sampled usually. So I'm not going to count that as a negative, really. Let's go through some of these crashes. There you go. Yeah, so you've got a rim click on the snare, just not the doom snare, apparently. But like other than that, there's not a lot of weird stuff. But again, the more articulations they try to throw into this thing, the bigger it gets, and then it kind of loses that lightweight footprint thing that I really like about it. And then you're installing like a 40 gigabyte drum library, and if you're putting that on a laptop, then suddenly you're all bogged down, and it's no longer great for creativity. So I'm not really gonna count that as a major negative on these. So typically, like if I were using this in a mixing scenario, I would probably, like most of the sounds, I prefer it kind of in this pro mode. So I assume that means like processed or maybe professional. I don't know. But I typically prefer things somewhat raw, so probably somewhere between raw and pro, maybe because I'm semi-pro. So I'd probably be using raw mode and routing everything out through the multi-outs and then processing things myself in Studio One or whatever DAW I happen to be using on that particular session. But that's just my preference. If you just need quick drums right off the bat, you can totally use these presets. You don't really need to worry about all of the multi-outs. One thing that the multi-outs will help you with is like if you need to sidechain, your kick to your bass or whatever you want to do, then you're probably going to want to use some of the multi-outs. But that's kind of a personal preference too. Maybe you don't really like doing that sort of thing. Maybe sidechaining ain't your bag. So let's take a look at some of the features. So like I said, it's got a super small footprint and doesn't require contact. So that's a plus right there. No contact. We're already ahead of the game. It comes with TCI or trigger files. So if you have trigger, you can have all of these samples at your disposal. If you don't know what trigger is, then you don't really need to worry about those TCI files. But they're there if you need them and if you have trigger. Like we talked about before, we've got these different modes, raw, pro, and smash. So you can kind of get different levels of processing quickly and easily. That's a cool feature. We've got this auto double kick, which can be cool. Like if you're just programming your drums with just, you're dragging out like or painting in kick patterns that are all like, the same note, like 16th notes or whatever. This can be a cool way to get that left-right double bass thing to kind of fight the machine gun effect. But if you do like sometimes I will actually program right and left kicks on separate MIDI notes. And in that case, like I prefer to not use the auto double kick mode because it'll just kind of, depending on the speed of the kicks, it'll kind of just alternate between them. And you don't always want that if you're going for ultra realistic stuff. But again, I'm a nerd. I do all my MIDI velocity stuff by hand. So typically I don't use a lot of these auto things, but if you're not into doing this stuff manually, then this can be really cool for you. We've got this Humanize knob, which randomizes the velocities of the notes as they come in. So in a lot of DAWs, you'll have, like in the MIDI editor, you'll have something that will randomize the velocity for you. I'm not a big fan of this in general. Like this is a cool feature because I know a lot of people are into that, and this just makes it kind of like an easy automatic way to do that. But me being a nerd, I don't see drum velocities as being random. I feel like drummers kind of have a pulse, they'll kind of accent notes in a certain way, and it's not really random in my opinion. So you could totally get by with that. Like if you're just like, hey, I'm just making a demo, I want this to not sound like a machine gun, you can totally use that. But in my opinion, it kind of puts accents in weird spots that a drummer never would. But again, that's not really, I'm not going to count that as a major negative for this because that's just something that people do anyway. They'll just randomize their MIDI in their, or randomize their velocity in their MIDI programming. So that's just what I consider to be, not really my cup of tea. So it's a cool feature that they have that. It's just not something that I would typically use. This almost seems kind of like the opposite of that. Well, let's demonstrate this stuff. Let's go to, we got some double bass stuff here. So let's demonstrate the auto velocity features here. So we've got these double kicks here. They're all on the right kick drum, and they're all maxed out in the velocity. So this is typically how you might see a drum MIDI programmed, or a programmed drum MIDI part. It's just everything's maxed out, and things can get a little bit robotic sounding. So this is without using any of the, features that are meant to make things sound a little bit more realistic. Okay, so we're like, hey, well, one thing we can do is do the auto double kick. So that's going to alternate right and left kick drums because they were sampled separately. So that instantly sounds better because it's not so machine gun-y. I don't really mind this part being too machine gun-y because, I kind of want that triggered sound, I guess. But if you want things to sound a little bit more natural, sometimes you might go to, randomize the velocities in a section like this. And that might be something like, where you highlight the MIDI notes and then you do some sort of action like, what do they call it here? Humanize. And then you can, kind of randomize the velocity range and the timing, but let's make those 0. So we're just randomizing the velocity range here. And then that'll do something like that, kind of randomize the velocities. But Ragnar has this built in where it'll do that for everything all at once. Granted, you probably could, maybe pull these down a little bit and get things sounding a little bit more realistic. So that automatically sounds better, but for me personally, I don't really want them to sound random. I want them to sound more like a drummer who might be accenting, certain kicks or, if it's on a snare or whatever. So that's there. It's useful if you don't like doing manual MIDI velocity adjustments. But I'm a nerd, and normally I do go in kick by kick and get kind of nerdy with stuff. This auto velocity thing, ignore MIDI velocities and just play pretty hard no matter what. So I think this would be like if you've got, like, say, a performance from an electronic kit and the velocities are just kind of all over the place. Let's simulate that real quick. I'm going to pull these down and then randomize, or humanize in this case. Let's make them too randomized. So maybe you got something like this. Those are all over the place. We can hit this button. Fixes it a little bit. I'm gonna leave them maxed out and try this auto velocity thing. It sounds like it's still kind of fluctuating a little bit. And again, this is where I don't really like automatic or randomized anything. So this isn't really a negative point for Ragnar drums. It's just for my own preference, I prefer to manually go, pretty much note by note, and I adjust the velocity. But you got to cut me some slack on this particular song. This is like 15 years old that I programmed this MIDI. So I just maxed it all out. Let's see what other stuff we got here. So we've got these quick faders. These are kind of cool to, if you just want all the toms up or down, the snare up or down, kick up or down, all the cymbals up or down. You've got that right here on this front page. If you want to go deeper into the mixer, you've got the mixer tab which has these cool different controls. So you can, like, each instrument, you can kind of control different levels between the close mics, the overheads, and the room mics. Got your standard pan controls for the drum shells, and then the cymbals you can invert, whether they're on the right or left. You can tune the drum shells, which is pretty handy. You've got this one-shot loader, which is cool if you've got like any drum samples that you like to use and you kind of want to make the drum sound a little bit more like your own. You've got that option there. The snare smash, I believe this is like a parallel compressor sort of thing. So yeah, you got that EQ. That's the mixer effects. These are the bus effects. So everything is going through all of these, and you can reorder them if you need to. You've got a simple 3-band EQ. You've got drive. You can use either saturation or clipping modes with a mix knob. That's power button there. Compressor with a mix knob and reverb. Here's your routing. So if you want to do the multi-out thing, you can set up different inputs here. So you've got 28 mono outputs. So what would that be? 14 stereo outs. You've got the groove player here. So you've got, if you don't really like writing fills or programming them, and I don't think anybody does. I really don't. You've got a bunch of drum fills that you can bring in. It's also a good way to just, if you're kind of messing with your sounds, you can just have one of those playing while you're tweaking stuff. And again, if you want to build a song with that, you're not really a drum programming kind of guy or gal, you can just drag that motherfucking shit up into your stuff. And then the MIDI mapping. So if you've got a MIDI file with vastly different mappings, there are some presets. You've got the standard Ragnar drums mapping, Steven Slate drums, Easy Drummer, Superior Drummer, Get Good drums, Mixed Wave drums, Alesis Nitro. These are probably some E-kit things. So you can kind of automatically remap to whatever drum library you normally use if you need to, or you can, each articulation you can learn, hit the learn button, then send a MIDI note in, and it'll automatically map that note to that articulation. And then you've got choices for different velocity curves here, however you want to do it. So again, it's not super duper in depth, but it has pretty much everything you're going to need. All right, pros and cons. The pros, it's lightweight yet sounds great. You don't have to use contact. That's a big plus. If you haven't run across any problems with contact so far in your travels, consider yourself lucky. Lets you load your own one-shot samples on the kick and snare. It's got cool mixing options and good controls for balancing close mics, overheads, and room mics without getting too crazy over the top detailed. It's got an effective EQ, which you can EQ cymbals separately if you want to. And the cymbals sound great. That's not always the case for other libraries. Cons for Ragnar drums. It's not quite as in-depth as you might want if you're looking for like lots of detailed control or a lot of articulations, like flams, rolls, like a ton of cymbals, stuff like that. So that's about it. All right, overall verdict. I would highly recommend this for songwriters looking for drums that sound great right out of the box, and especially those who are after modern drum sounds that are more or less, kind of more on the processed side. The sound, like this does that really well, in my opinion. I'm not trying to knock that. It's just not normally what I go for, but they sound pretty great. Like you don't really have to do much to get that sound at all. So if you're into that modern drum sound, this is a quick way to get there. If you're more of a detail-oriented producer or mixer looking for tons of options and lots of different articulations, I'd maybe go with something like Superior Drummer 3, but it's kind of a money pit, so you have to kind of weigh that out. Like if you want all of that detail and like extreme tweakability, you have to pay for it, and it gets pretty expensive. I've probably got, I mean, I'd have to actually add it up, but probably about $1,000 or so invested in Superior Drummer 3. I feel like Ragnar drums could easily compete with a lot of the popular drum library options like Get Good Drums or some of the Bogren Digital stuff. But the fact that Ragnar drums doesn't need contact to operate kind of makes me lean more towards this. And again, if you've never had any problems with contact, consider yourself lucky. I don't really like it that much. I should probably mention that I'm making this video prior to the release of Ragnar drums, so I don't really know how much it's going to cost when it comes out. But assuming that it's somewhere in the same price range as some of the other drum library options that we discussed earlier that require contact or contact player to operate, I would be more inclined to go with Ragnar drums just because, for one, well, it doesn't require contact. It's not just for that. It sounds, really good out of the box. You don't really have to tweak it a whole bunch, which isn't always the case with a lot of presets. And I'm not trying to harp on Superior Drummer. If it weren't so expensive, I'd probably harp on it less, but it's very expensive and I have a lot of gripes with it. Like the presets, I've gone through like pretty much all the presets and like they all need to be tweaked quite a bit. These presets are like, cool, that sounds good. Cool, that one also sounds good. Cool, this one sounds good. And if you're looking for like something to just get going with like songwriting, like you just need drums that sound good now, as opposed to like needing to sit there and tweak on drums for months just to get them to sound as good as these, it makes these kind of a no-brainer in that regard, in my opinion. And again, typically I am one of those nerds who will just go super into detail with stuff, so like I do appreciate the Superior Drummer side of things, but sometimes that can just be really frustrating because you spend a lot of money and a lot of time to get things to sound kind of like this. So he's already ready to go. So yeah, that's my verdict as some random dude on the internet. So I hope that was somewhat helpful for you if you're looking at these drums and you're like, oh, I don't really know. Hopefully I maybe answered some questions for you one way or the other, and I have helped you make a final decision on how to possibly spend some money or not spend money. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Later!